What's up everybody, this is Master Ian Gamer. Now that Mercy and D.Va's reworked versions have been on live servers for a while, the idea of other major hero reworks have frequently come up in the Overwatch community. One hero in particular who is often considered to be in need of a rework is Orisa. So in this video, I'm going to analyze Orisa and her position in the game to determine if she in fact needs some kind of overhaul, and if so, what exactly should be changed. The topic which is perhaps most brought up is the similarity between Orisa's and Mercy's ultimates. Given that Mercy's damage boost now chains, her ultimate as a whole seems to just eclipse the power of Orisa's. Both ults can damage boost multiple nearby targets, although Mercy's can also be used to heal, fly, and enhance all her other abilities. However, this is a very poor comparison to try to make. While Orisa's Supercharger does most likely need some kind of tweaking done to it, and I'll go into detail about why a little later, you can't really compare Mercy and Orisa like this. They are two very different heroes, and thus are utilized in very different ways. One's a tank, and the other's a support. The Supercharger is an independent stationary object which, once deployed, requires no further involvement from Orisa herself beyond choosing to defend it. Mercy, however, must be actively damage boosting her team, meaning that she can't focus on healing or firing her pistol while doing this. Furthermore, the damage boost provided by the Supercharger is 50% and can reach up to 25 meters away from itself, whereas Mercy can only provide 30% and only chains to targets up to 10 meters away from the ally directly being boosted. So while the concept of Mercy's ultimate may at first sound overall superior to Orisa's, this isn't the case when looking at each ult's technical specs. In fact, they make Mercy's Valkyrie damage boosting sound more like an inferior but mobile Supercharger. Looking past just her Supercharger, Orisa as a whole is actually a fairly balanced hero. She can be a very strong pick, especially when part of an optimized and coordinated team. Because of this, she can occasionally work quite well at even high-level competitive matches, and yet most people feel that she isn't in a good spot in the game. In actuality, they're not wrong, and there are two major factors that put her in this position. The first of these reasons is that her playstyle conflicts with dive comp, which has unfortunately been the meta since her arrival in the game. As I mentioned, she can be strong in the right situations, but not when she's against a Genji, Tracer, Winston, and D.Va. Given her lack of short-range, burst, or AoE damage abilities, she has nothing other than Halt to try and combat these kinds of opponents. But even that's not particularly effective against heroes with such high mobility, and they can easily just move past her barrier and dance around her massive hitbox, allowing them to damage her directly with ease. Given this kind of meta and how long it's been around relative to her presence in the game, she basically never had a chance to get a foothold to show off her potential before her weaknesses created the stereotype of her being a menial hero pick. The second reason for her status, however, is much more severe, and that's just how she feels as a hero. Blizzard has frequently made hero changes simply because of how they feel being played over their actual mechanical value. This was a major factor in Roadhog's notorious past nerf, and even in Mercy's recent rework. Blizzard wants the game to be enjoyable to play, and often one of the biggest ways to make this happen is just to make the gameplay itself feel good. Most people feel that Orisa's abilities and playstyle are unoriginal and uninteresting, which may be an indicator that Blizzard will look into tweaking her. They're not wrong in saying this, especially with regards to the unoriginality of her abilities. Reinhardt also has a barrier, Halt is just a miniature Graviton Surge, and her ultimate is basically a glorified Mercy damage boost. The only ability of hers which really stands out as being original is Fortify, but at this point, the damage reduction aspect isn't at all unique, leaving only the unstoppable attribute as solely hers. While all these abilities work well together as a single hero, in hindsight, Blizzard maybe should have tried for something a bit more outstanding than what we ended up getting. Again, this is strictly subjective, but many people seem to agree that she's lacking in terms of interesting gameplay. Disregarding the crossover aspect of most of her abilities, many of them also just feel flat out underwhelming at times, even if they're technically quite strong. Most notably of these are Fortify and Supercharger. Fortify, despite being her most unique ability, tends to not always feel impactful. One reason for this is the fact that it's a compound ability. While the damage reduction and unstoppable aspects both often complement each other, they just as often are useful as only one or the other. For example, You could use Fortify to avoid getting knocked off a ledge by Pharah's concussive blast, or to reduce incoming damage from a Junkrat. In each situation, only one of Fortify's aspects is being utilized, but since they are tied to the same ability, a well-coordinated enemy can take advantage of this to work around one aspect or the other. While this makes the ability itself more versatile, Orisa overall is more vulnerable because of it being one ability with a shared cooldown instead of two. I talked about this specific issue before in my new Roadhog analysis video, where I drew the connection between Orisa's Fortify and Roadhog's Take a Breather. Both are powerful compound abilities, but fall into the rut of being used primarily for one aspect over the other. For example, Fortify at many levels of play tends to be primarily used for the 50% damage reduction, and in many cases players won't even use it to become unstoppable, simply because they don't want the damage reduction to be unavailable due to its long cooldown. At the same time though, many players solely use it for the opposite reason, neglecting to consider the damage reduction and instead only using it to be unstoppable for 4 seconds. Unfortunately, there isn't much that can be done about this. The reason that Blizzard gives heroes compound abilities is more than likely just to keep things simpler. Orisa already has a Shift, E, and Q ability, as well as both a primary and alternate fire. Dividing Fortify into two separate abilities wouldn't work since there's no buttons left to place either on. They would have to find a way to add a whole new button, which would prove to be exceptionally problematic on console versions. However, one solution that possibly could be implemented would be to give Fortify a resource meter, just like D.Va's Defense Matrix. Defense Matrix used to be a horrible ability because of how easy it was to bait it out and then take advantage of its long cooldown. But after Blizzard made it run off of a resource meter instead of a set cooldown, it became much more versatile and, if regulated properly, would almost always be available when need be. Orisa could possibly stand to benefit by getting this kind of change as well. The exact ability uptime and activation delay would probably have to be tweaked around a bit, as this rework could easily make her OP, but overall it could do a lot to not only make her more powerful as a hero, but also simply feel better in the hands of the player. While it'd still be a compound ability, each of its aspects could be used more freely without worrying as much about the ability's currently lengthy cooldown. Moving on to Supercharger, this ability is the worst of these two underwhelming perpetrators. While a 50% damage boost is no small contribution, and it can oftentimes turn the tide of a fight, it certainly isn't without its shortcomings. First of all, its presence is barely noticeable by the teammates who are getting boosted by it. Think about how often you've had an Orisa on your team, and compare it to how often you've noticed being under the effects of her ultimate. Aside from actually seeing it or its boost beams, which isn't often given that Orisa will usually deploy it either behind or to the side of your position, the only other indicators of it being active is Orisa's ultimate voice line, the barely noticeable blue boost aura on your screen, or seeing that your shots are dealing more damage to the enemy. Again, this isn't an issue for well-coordinated teams who are in constant communication while playing, but for the average person in quick play, even after the fight's over, they probably won't ever realize that you actually ever deployed it. Furthermore, Supercharger itself, being immobile and only having 200 HP, is an incredibly easy target for the enemy, especially if they're running dive comp. Heroes like Tracer, Genji, D.Va, and especially Winston, given how his Tesla cannon damages through barriers, can all easily take out this prone target. When using the ultimate, Orisa basically has to deploy her barrier over it, activate Fortify, and then just stand on top of it, firing at anyone who comes close. She usually will have to babysit it for the entire duration that it's active, making the ultimate not only feel mundane when used, but also even a bit of a chore to have around. Regardless of how closely you defend it, it still most of the time is just way too easy for the enemy to kill. Granted, it can at least serve as a decent distraction for the attackers, but overall, makes for just a flat-out unexciting ultimate. So then, how could Blizzard go about fixing these problems? For starters, making its presence more noticeable by Orisa's teammates is a must. One solution would be to increase the sound Orisa makes when activating the ult, or making the Supercharger either noisier itself, or giving a more noticeable visual indicator. Think about Junkrat's Riptire in comparison. Players on the enemy team will always know when he ults because of how loud it is for the duration of its usage. Having a similar effect, except this time on your allies instead of enemies, could definitely help it to be more effective for the team. As for finding a way to make this Supercharger more powerful and harder to destroy, this is where things get trickier. The one aspect which Blizzard almost certainly won't change is its immobility. Given that Orisa is a tank, her ultimate is oriented around being a form of crowd control. A big aspect of this is to be able to hold down a point, which is exactly what Supercharger does. It boosts the damage of all allies, making them thus stronger at performing each of their own roles. It quite literally serves as a team war crier or motivator. Thus, unless you build it onto the back of a giant truck, it wouldn't make sense for this to be able to move in any way. There could be an adjustment to its health, although this is unlikely given that it already has the health of most heroes in the game. Giving it armor or shields wouldn't really work either, since at its core, it's supposed to be a support-like team booster. Honestly, any changes done to the ultimate probably wouldn't be to the Supercharger itself, but rather some kind of independent buff that applies only to Orisa once the ultimate is activated. This could be a Molten Core style temporary armor buff, increased fire rate, or some kind of enhancement to her abilities which make her better at defending the Supercharger. The device could also potentially provide a speed boost in addition to the damage boost to either just Orisa or the team as a whole. This would make its benefits more powerful to help offset its own vulnerability, also while maintaining the tribal drum theme. And this could even help with teammates being aware of its presence, since with regards to Lucio, I'm sure everyone notices when they get his speed boost aura. So overall, Orisa, while still useful, definitely seems to be in need of some kind of tweaking or rework. Unfortunately, there's no easy solution that comes to mind for this problem, and there are a number of possible aspects which Blizzard could look into changing. The focus of any of these changes, however, should be to make her feel more fun or interesting to play. I personally enjoy playing her quite a bit as she is, but many people don't share this perspective. While her issues are by no means critical for the sake of game balance or anything, I'm sure there's something Blizzard is working on as I speak. If I had to make a guess, I'd say we can expect to see some kind of substantial change for Orisa within the next 6 months. It might not be a rework as big as the ones we've seen for Mercy and D.Va, but it will greatly affect her as a hero, and the primary focus of the change will be her ultimate and possibly also Fortify. Anyways, that'll do it for today. Thank you for watching, and please comment below with your own thoughts about Orisa and whether or not she's in need of changes. Let me know what you think of my proposed solutions, and feel free to mention your own. Also, you can cast your vote about her in today's poll card. If you want to check out more discussions about Orisa, I'll have some topical Reddit posts linked in the description below. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and you can subscribe, follow me on Twitter, and click the bell icon to both help out my channel and keep up with my future Overwatch content. This is Mastery and Gamer signing off, and until next time,
thank you for your compliance.